he never felt safe. He never felt loved. And I think if you start from that kind of deficit and you never find somebody to fill in the gaps or to heal you, then you are sort of at the mercy of anybody who may find you of use. Unfortunately, my grandfather is ultimately the person who did the most damage to Donald because he exploited Donald's weaknesses and he exploited the damage that had been done to him because the defense mechanisms Donald had to utilize in order to protect himself from the loneliness and fear he experienced when his mother was absent from him.
Now, Mary Trump is the niece of Donald Trump, a clinical psychologist and writer. She's found life within the Trump family administration to be difficult, to say the least. Her side of the family was cut off by Donald's father, her dad Fred, a very successful airline pilot, dismissed as being nothing but a bus driver in the sky, a man not worthy of being the Trump successor in business, something that Mary believes drove her dad to the drink and depression that meant that he died at the very young age of 42. Mary's mum Linda was never welcomed by the family either, and Mary's relationship with her mum was strained. Mary describes the absolute loneliness of a childhood when your parents can't offer you the care that you want and need. Now, Mary has written about all of this in her latest memoir, which is called Who Could Ever Love You? You're very welcome on the programme, Mary. How are you?
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm actually great. I'm at the Hay Festival in Hay-on-Wye, and it's been an incredible experience, especially to see how many people are really engaged with the issues that are troubling so many of us, not just in America, but elsewhere.
Your childhood is very painful, Mary. I defy anybody who reads your book not to be really moved by some of the stuff that you witnessed and lived through as a child. I mean, for example, a mother who, even when you were very ill with asthma, really couldn't look after you with the love and the care that you needed. A father whom you witnessed pointing a gun at your mother during an argument. Has it helped you to be able to tell the world your story? Is that how it works for you?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't write the book as a way to work through any issues, but I did think it was important for people to understand that regardless of how prominent your family may be or how powerful your family may be, there's a lot we can all relate to in telling our stories. And I think I had that experience with my first book, the way I discussed my dad's family of origin, and then with the latest book, my own, it really resonates with people. And I think it helps people make sense of where we are. And also, I think it makes people feel less isolated in their own family experiences. So even though, writing the book wasn't exactly pleasant, because as you mentioned, there were a lot of difficult things I had to live through in order to find my way to where I am now, it's quite gratifying for people to see their own experiences in mine.
But so quickly everybody wants to ask you about your uncle, Donald Trump, and I wonder whether sometimes actually that becomes really quite painful for you.
I don't know that I would say it's painful. What's painful is the fact that he remains relevant. And he remains relevant for the obvious reason that 74 million Americans saw it as a reasonable step to re-elect him. And he is now president of the United States, having a serious negative impact on not just American politics, but on geopolitics. So it's more that we have to keep talking about him because he continues to cause such damage to American institutions and also, of course, to our relationships with other countries. So that's the bigger problem for me. And I think beyond Donald, though, we do ourselves and the issues that we're facing right now a serious disservice if we pretend that he's the problem. I've said this for a long time, he's a symptom of a much larger problem. And at some point, we're going to have to grapple with exactly what that means.
Mary, I also really enjoyed your book, and it's great to meet you. I'd love to hear your reflections. If you were in the UK right now and Prime Minister, I'm sure you'd make a great one, but what would you be advising any world leader to think about when they have to inevitably deal with your uncle? As you said, he is relevant from every angle, in every sphere, through every lens, and I'm interested in how you would approach the kind of realpolitik of a situation with him.
Yeah, it's a great question because it's so it's so immediate. Like this is unfolding in real time. We see this time and time again, whether it's Keir Starmer or Mark Carney in Canada or Francis Macron. People, leaders of other countries are having to grapple with just how to deal with the reality, not just that Donald Trump is in the Oval Office, but that he is completely willing to misuse and abuse his power against our allies in ways that were heretofore unthinkable. What I have found kind of confounding, even though I understand it to some degree, is the extent to which leaders of other countries have chosen appeasement and in some cases capitulation over standing strong against a man who is a very weak, very damaged human being. So in other words, I get that it seems like the safest thing to do in the moment to appease Donald so that he lowers tariffs or he doesn't take another dangerous step against your country. But that's a short-term solution that isn't going to end well. And I've been hoping for a long time that world leaders would unite, would create a united front and recognize that the best way to deal with somebody like Donald is to confront him relentlessly and not back down. We've seen this in American institutions as well, white shoe law firms, institutions of higher learning, instead of banding together and pushing back against the incursions of the Trump regime. They are, many of them anyway, sort of obeying in advance, which is the last thing to do in the face of an authoritarian government.
We were talking about Harvard just earlier in the program and the relationship and the twists and turns in the battle between them. So do you think that Harvard's position is how you would urge world leaders to think about dealing with him, to stand firm and just stick to a core set of values that you know are true?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the place to start. Harvard is an extraordinarily powerful institution that has a $54 billion endowment. What is more mystifying to me is that Columbia, which is almost at the same level of Harvard, did, as I said earlier, they capitulated right out of the gate. So I've heard a very interesting idea being bandied about that universities create a sort of NATO in which if one university is attacked, the rest of them join forces to support that institution. And that, again, is, I think, a great model for how to deal with the United States of America in its current incarnation.
Mary, you said that he is a damaged man. Who do you believe he's been damaged by?
Well, fundamentally, Donald's problems, his psychological and emotional problems, stem from the fact that as a very young child, when he was about 2.5, which is the most crucial developmental period in a young child's life, his mother was very ill. So she was psychologically, emotionally, and physically absent for about a year, which is devastating. So one problem is that during that time, the only person he had as a quote unquote caregiver was his father, who was a sociopath. And then because my grandmother continued to be ill in other ways, she was not emotionally capable of healing the rifts that had occurred in her relationship with him. So he never felt safe. He never felt loved. And I think if you start from that kind of deficit and you never find somebody to fill in the gaps or to heal you, then you are sort of at the mercy of anybody who may find you of use. Unfortunately, my grandfather is ultimately the person who did the most damage to Donald because he exploited Donald's weaknesses and he exploited the damage that had been done to him because the defense mechanisms Donald had to utilize in order to protect himself from the loneliness and fear he experienced when his mother was absent from him. He became kind of hardened. He became a bully. He became somebody who convinced himself that he didn't need anything from anybody else. Those are qualities that my grandfather valued, and he didn't just exploit them, but he actually made them worse.
I was quite interested to read in the book about the sheer amount of litigation that has gone on within your family, Mary. And I think at one point you described that kind of suing and countersuing as the love language of the Trumps, which is quite a phrase. I know you've been involved in these cases too, but can you explain to us what that means in terms of the family? Is it because everybody needs to win? Or is it because people can't talk about their emotions with each other? What lies behind the need to constantly go to court?
Yeah, it's actually really fascinating. My grandfather cared only about his business and his success, and that translated into wealth, right? So money in my family has always been the only currency. And I mean that literally, of course, but I also mean that money stood in for all of the other things that most human beings value. It stood in for love, it stood in for affection, and it stood in for your worth as a human being. So the message that was given to my grandfather's 5 children, including Donald and my father, was that the more you have, literally, materially, the more you're worth, and the less you have, the less you're worth. So it was a zero-sum game, even among the siblings. And if somebody challenges you, even if they're challenging you in order to get back something you've stolen from them, you feel like your sense of worth is being attacked, and hence the lawsuit. So, currently, sort of, I I think it's fair to say that this was in response to the fact that 4 years ago, I sued my family because I believed that there had been some fraud involved in my disinheritance. A year later, Donald sued me for breach of contract for $100 million. So that's where we are now. And I think, again, it's because I challenged the idea that some of what he had did not actually belong to him. And if I had succeeded in taking it back, he would have been literally and metaphorically speaking worthless.
Mary, you start with your mother's story in the book, and I assume that that was quite a deliberate act. I'm really interested in your reflections on the women in the Trump family and their relative power or not. Your relationship with your Aunt Marianne is also interesting. You're kind of close, then very much not so, and then her sort of trying to build bridges and so on. In that relationship you described of kind of transactions and suing and countersuing, how do you see women in the Trump family?
I think that the most basic thing to know is that everybody, not everybody, but most of the people in my family were misogynists, including the women, including my grandmother, including my Aunt Marianne, which certainly in Marianne's case was pretty shocking because she was a quite successful woman a professional woman in her own right. She was the federal judge in the United States, and she was appointed by Ronald Reagan, and she was elevated by Bill Clinton, and she had, though, contempt for women that was actually quite shocking. And I think it, at least unconsciously, undermined her own sense of accomplishment. And it's just another reason that, her value continued to be tied to her wealth, which ended up being quite debilitating for her. And I think it interfered with her ability to be the kind of charitable, generous person she wanted to be.
Do you ever just want to change your name and walk away, Mary?
I don't want to change my name because it's my name, and that might sound reductive, but what I mean is this. When I was a child, I went to summer camp, and it was the best thing in my life, and everybody there called me Trump. This was long before anybody knew who Donald was. It was in Massachusetts. Nobody knew who my family was. And it's been that's what people called me. So it's my name in a very deep way. And it's hard for me to imagine changing it. Do I sometimes want to walk away? Yes, I do. Because this is never what I imagined for myself by any stretch of the imagination. My life is just completely different from what it was before 2020. But I think much more importantly, I think we live in times that require all of us to do work we never imagined ourselves doing, to make sacrifices we never thought we would have to make. And I believe we're at a crossroads, certainly in the United States and potentially in human history, where everything is potentially at stake, and the idea of walking away. And I don't know what influence I have. I don't know what difference I make. But if I can make any difference at all, I don't think I could live with myself if I walked away.
Mary, thank you for that. It's very good to talk to you. Mary's book is called Who Could Ever Love You? And it's out in hardback now. We appreciate your time very much.